Human civilization runs on imaginary things. Money, laws, borders, human rights. You can't just point to them in nature. You won't find a nation growing out of the ground. You can't measure justice in a lab. And yet these invisible things shape almost every decision we make. You wake up because of money. You obey laws because you believe others will. You respect borders because you believe they matter. This isn't a conspiracy, it's an observation. Human civilization runs on imaginary things, and it always has. But here's the question. How did shared belief become the most powerful force in human history? The historian Yuval Noah Harari suggests that the defining feature of Homo sapiens isn't just our intelligence, it's our ability to make and believe in shared myths. He calls these systems imagined orders. Money, nations, corporations, they're not imaginary in the sense that they're meaningless. They're imaginary in the sense that they only exist because enough people agree they do. If everyone stopped accepting dollars tomorrow, the paper would still exist, but the value wouldn't. So how did humans become the type of species that can build entire civilizations out of shared belief? To answer that, we have to go back. Way back. Around 70,000 years ago, something changed in human cognition. Anthropologists call it the cognitive revolution. Before this point, early humans could only communicate basic information. I'm hungry. There's danger. Follow me. But after this shift, humans began communicating in a different way. We began to talk about things. Things that weren't physically present. Spirits, ancestors, invisible forces, shared identities. A chimpanzee could warn its group about a predator, but it couldn't convince hundreds of strangers that they're all descended from a common ancestor. Humans could. And once that became possible, everything changed. Here's the evolutionary puzzle. For most of human history, cooperation only worked in small groups. You worked with your family because you knew them. But humans ended up eventually coordinating in groups of thousands, then millions. Anthropologists suggest that a shared belief system was the key. If two strangers believe in the same ancestor, the same god, the same law, they can trust each other without needing to know each other, without personal familiarity. That's a powerful survival advantage. Groups that coordinate better together tend to outcompete groups that don't, and belief tends to be a very powerful coordination tool. Not because it's always true, but because it's shared. Once shared belief became possible, human societies began scaling rapidly. Tribes became chiefdoms, chiefdoms became kingdoms, kingdoms became empires. Religion provided moral codes, law created predictable behavior, money enabled trade between strangers. Intangible systems with tangible effects. Cities rise, roads are built, wars are fought. Belief becomes the foundation. And over time, these imaginary systems start to feel natural. Society flows and functions until everything comes crashing down. So, we've established that civilizations depend on shared beliefs. But what happens when we start to see cracks in the foundation? Let's look at 18th century France. At that time, France was organized around a widely accepted idea. The monarchy ruled by what we call divine right. The king's authority didn't come from popularity or performance. It came from God. Political theorists often distinguish between power and legitimacy. Power is the ability to enforce rules. Legitimacy is the belief that those rules deserve to be obeyed. For decades, the king had power. But over time, his legitimacy began to erode. Economic hardship increased, food shortages worsened, public debt grew. But material hardship alone doesn't automatically trigger revolution. Many societies endure poverty without overthrowing their governments. What changed in France was perception. Pamphlets circulated, Enlightenment ideas spread, people questioned divine authority. The king's decisions began to look less sacred and more fallible. And once people begin to question whether a system is justified, something subtle begins to shift. They may still comply, but their compliance becomes conditional. Historians often describe this moment as a crisis of confidence, a sudden, severe loss of trust, faith, or belief. The monarchy didn't lose power overnight. It lost belief. And when enough people stop believing authority is legitimate, enforcement becomes unstable. Orders require more force. Force produces resentment. Resentment accelerates doubt. Eventually, the system tips. The French Revolution wasn't just an explosion of anger, it was the collapse of a shared narrative. The monarchy relied on a story, divine right, inherited hierarchy, natural order. When the story stopped convincing enough people, the structure built on top of it became fragile. The king still had soldiers, but soldiers are people too, and they live inside belief systems as well. Eventually, without belief in his legitimacy, the king was killed by his own people. By the end of the French Revolution, thousands of people were killed by guillotine, and it remains an example of a failed belief system. Modern political scientists often describe states as belief-dependent institutions. Governments function not only because they have police and armies, but because their citizens widely accept their authority. Sociologist Max Weber defined legitimacy as belief in the rightfulness of a rule. Notice the wording, belief. When legitimacy weakens, governments don't instantly disappear, but their ability to coordinate large populations declines. You see this in revolutions, you see this in economic crises, even corporate collapses. When trust in a bank falls, the bank doesn't physically vanish, but depositors withdraw money because they expect others to withdraw money. That expectation alone can destroy the entire institution. Economists call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. Belief alters behaviour, behaviour alters outcomes, outcomes confirm belief. The French Revolution can be read through this lens. The monarchy became unstable not only because of hunger, but because enough people stopped believing that the old order made sense. And when beliefs start to shift, new stories compete to try and replace them. In France, those stories included citizenship, sovereignty, universal rights. When one imagined order erodes, another emerges. But if social systems depend on shared belief, does that make them fragile? Could our society collapse at any moment? Possibly, but fragility might not be the whole story. Belief systems can weaken, but they can also adapt. Some societies reform their institutions before legitimacy collapses. Others resist reform and face rupture. What outcome occurs seems to depend on how flexible the shared narrative is. Rigid stories like divine rule shatter. Adaptive stories evolve. So maybe the better question isn't whether belief systems are fragile, but whether they can be maintained. That leads us somewhere unexpected. Some societies didn't wait for belief to collapse, they actively reinforced it. If some societies collapse when belief weakens, is it worth asking, can belief be reinforced intentionally? Let's look at ancient Greece. For a long time, ancient Greek civilization wasn't unified politically. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, these were independent but often hostile city-states. But they did share language, mythology, and ritual calendars. For nearly 2,000 years, people from all across the Greek world, farmers, philosophers, generals, even emperors, traveled to a place called Eleusis. They all participated in what was known as the Eleusinian Mysteries. We don't know exactly what happened. Participants swore secrecy and written accounts are scarce. But historians and anthropologists agree on something important. Whatever the content of the ritual was, the experience was transformative. Initiates reportedly returned less afraid of death, more content in their lives, and more connected to a larger order. So what made it so powerful? It probably wasn't secret knowledge or divine intervention. From a psychological perspective, the structure of the ritual itself might have been the key. Ritual does something unusual in the human brain. Modern cognitive scientists suggest that rituals increase group cohesion, reinforce shared identities, heighten emotional intensity, and strengthen memory encoding. In 1912, French sociologist Émile Durkheim introduced the concept of collective effervescence, the heightened emotional energy that emerges when groups participate in rituals together. Modern sociology still uses this framework. When people fast together, walk together, sing together, or endure discomfort together, their brains synchronize in measurable ways. Neuroscientists have found that synchronized movements and shared emotional experiences can release oxytocin from the brain and bond people together socially. But beyond bonding, ritual also reinforces meaning. When an experience is rare, structured, emotionally charged, and socially validated, the brain treats it as significant. Expectation amplifies perception. If thousands of people believe something is sacred, and you undergo a carefully designed experience within that framework, the power doesn't necessarily come from what is revealed. It may come from how expectation and shared belief shape interpretation. In that sense, Eleusis wasn't just spiritual, it was stabilizing. It reinforced a shared worldview before it fractured. Eleusis functioned as a shared symbolic anchor. Even when the city-states fought each other, they still recognized the same gods, the same mythic framework, the same sacred cycles. And that matters. When multiple groups share a cosmology, it reduces total fragmentation. It creates what anthropologists call a superordinate identity. You're Athenian, you're Spartan, but you're also Greek. Eleusis helped to reinforce that larger identity layer. At this point, a pattern begins to emerge. Belief isn't just a story we tell ourselves. It may function as a coordination technology. It allows strangers to cooperate. It allows laws to function. It allows markets to operate. And rituals may serve as maintenance mechanisms. They reinforce the narrative. They remind participants that others still believe. And that second layer, believing that others believe, is crucial. Game theorists sometimes refer to this as common knowledge. It's not enough for you to just believe in money. You have to believe that other people believe in money too. And you have to believe that they believe that you believe. This recursive structure stabilizes systems, but it also reveals something slightly unsettling. These systems don't just float above us. They're sustained by our participation. So, is it really just an illusion? At this stage, it might be tempting to conclude that everything is just fake. But that might be a little bit too simplistic. Yes, money might not be physically edible, but its effects are still real. Borders aren't visible from space, but crossing one without permission will have consequences. Legal systems are abstract, but their enforcement changes lives. So perhaps the better distinction isn't real versus imaginary, it's physical versus intersubjective. Some things exist in the world regardless of belief, others exist because people agree they do. Which leads to an even deeper question. If belief creates structure at the scale of civilization, what does it do at the scale of an individual? What can it do for you? To understand belief at the scale of civilization, it helps to zoom in, all the way down to the brain. And this is where it gets really interesting. Modern neuroscience suggests that the brain isn't just reacting to reality, it's predicting it. Rather than passively receiving information from the world, the brain constantly builds models about what it expects to happen next. It predicts patterns. It anticipates outcomes. It fills in gaps before we're even aware of them. When reality matches expectation, the brain feels stable. When it doesn't, the brain adjusts. Belief in this framework isn't just an abstract opinion, it's a working model, a guide for attention, a filter for interpretation, a prediction about how the world operates. And those predictions shape behaviour. There's a well-documented phenomenon in psychology. Expectation alters experience. Placebo studies are one example. If someone believes a pill will reduce pain, measurable changes occur in the brain's pain processing regions, even when the pill is inert. The belief doesn't create tissue repair, but it changes perception and response. Something similar happens socially. If you believe a system is stable, you behave differently than if you believe it's collapsing. If you believe people can be trusted, you cooperate more readily. If you believe others will defect, you guard yourself. Belief shapes attention, attention shapes action, and action shapes outcomes. And over time, these outcomes reinforce that original belief. This feedback loop doesn't require deception. It requires expectation. We know from behavioral science that what a person believes is possible influences how much effort they invest. If someone believes improvement is possible, they're more likely to persist. If someone believes failure is inevitable, they're more likely to disengage early. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on mindset touches on this idea, not as magic, but as behavioral reinforcement. Belief influences attention, attention influences effort, and effort influences results. That doesn't mean belief overrides physics, but it can determine whether someone acts long enough for change to occur. And that's not mystical, it's behavioral. At this point, two interpretations are possible, and one is quite unsettling. If civilization depends on shared belief, then it's vulnerable. Markets could fail if confidences collapse. Governments could destabilize if legitimacy erodes. Institutions could weaken if trust declines. It's true that history suggests that it's happened before, but there's another interpretation. Belief might not be a flaw in the system, it might be the system. Humans seem wired to construct shared meaning. When one narrative fades, another replaces it. Monarchies give way to republics. Religious authority gave way to constitutional law. Empires gave way to nation states. The stories change. The mechanism doesn't. So perhaps the deeper question isn't whether belief shapes civilizations. It definitely appears to. The more difficult question is this. If the structures around us exist because we collectively agree to act as if they do, then what role do we play in sustaining them? And if belief can scale cooperation, reinforce identity, and reshape behavior, what happens when we withdraw it? Are our institutions fragile illusions, or are they the most powerful inventions our species has ever created? And if belief is inevitable, if humans are meaning-making by nature, then what are we choosing to believe now? And what world is that belief quietly building? Thank you guys for watching. A lot of work goes into making these episodes for you, so make sure you guys give us a comment down below and a like, and let us know what you'd like to see next on the channel. Catch you on the next one.